Hello, my name is Joshua Lang, and today I'd like to talk to you about the Pacific Northwest, the timber industry, and science. The Pacific Northwest is a volcanically active region situated along the western coast of the North American continent. It is a wet and mild area thanks to ocean currents bringing in moist winds and the Cascade Mountains that trap all that moisture in a rain shadow. This means that the El Niño Southern Oscillation can alter weather patterns here as the cycle changes from warm to cool and back again. Because we're talking about the timber industry, we'll focus on the major tree species that are found here. Those include Douglas-fir, western red cedar, western hemlock, Sitka spruce, Engelmann spruce, grand fir, subalpine fir, ponderosa pine, western larch, red alder, and Pacific yew. After World War II and the baby boomer generation, wood for home construction was in high demand. The Pacific Northwest hosted a vigorous timber industry that provided tens of thousands of good-paying jobs. The problem was, the highest earning timber was found in old-growth forests, where huge old trees have grown for hundreds of years. At the time, old-growth forests were seen as biologically dead because they weren't host to many game species like deer, and those were of higher priority. So logging went unabated for decades. By 1993, just 7% of the forests in the Pacific Northwest were old growth. Enter Dr. Jerry Franklin. He advocated for halting timber sales of old-growth forests, fearing that if nothing was done, they would lose the old-growth forests forever. His research discovered that these old-growth forests were a critical component of overall ecosystem health, and he was instrumental in the development of the controversial 1993 Northwest Forest Plan. As environmental groups absorbed the research of Dr. Franklin, they managed to get the northern spotted owl listed as endangered, and because that bird relies upon old-growth forest for habitat, it was hoped that this would be enough to halt logging of old-growth forest. The result was an almost immediate end to the local timber industry. Thousands of loggers lost their jobs, and a cultural schism opened between the loggers and the environmentalists. The environmentalists were accused of weaponizing the Endangered Species Act, and the loggers were accused of only caring about profits. But it didn't have to be this way. As it turns out, forests are dynamic entities that are constantly changing over time. Because of natural disturbances like wildfires, wind blowdowns, or even volcanic eruptions, the structure and composition of the forest changes locally where it's been disturbed, and this results in different successional states called seral stages. Early seral stages benefit the overall ecology just as much as late seral stages such as old growth. To use the simplest example, when trees are knocked down or burned up, they expose the forest floor to higher levels of sunlight, allowing different species of plants to grow that also attract different kinds of wildlife. So now the question becomes, can we use timber harvesting to mimic these disturbances? Dr. Franklin seems to think so. He witnessed the recovery after the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens and came to understand that early seral stages were just as important as old growth. Where once this complex early seral stage had comprised almost 20% of coastal Oregon, only 2% remained at the end of the 20th century. This, obviously, is an issue just as important as protecting old-growth forest. However, there's still disagreement as to what extent land managers should go to in promoting these early seral stages and what methods should be used to facilitate them. Some are still against any and all logging on federal lands, while others, such as Dr. Franklin, advocate for targeted harvesting to create more patches of early seral stage, as well as using harvesting to promote overall landscape heterogeneity and spatial patchiness. My question is, can we use any tricks to help harvesting closer mimic the disturbances that lead to seral reset? Because when a wildfire burns through an area, heat was applied that has other effects on soils, nutrients released into the system, chemical changes, etc., and a clear cut lacks all those other interactions. Same for a blowdown. Because fire didn't move through, any saplings that weren't smashed under a fallen tree will now have a bit more protection and nutrition, assisting in their growth. This advanced regeneration is impossible if a clear cut leaves the entire patch exposed. I propose a research experiment. This study will require a total of 5 sites that all share similar elevation, aspect, slope, and vegetative structure, so as to control as many variables as possible. To remove weather and climate as a confounding variable, all sites should be established within the same year and within 25 miles of a central point. 2 sites will be located on natural disturbances, a wildfire and a blowdown. Again, hopefully these will be similar in size and distance to live seed sources. Then, 3 sites will be harvested. 1 site will host a prescribed burn post-harvest, while the other site is manicured with selected exposed root complexes and intact fallen trees to provide that beneficial microclimate for advanced regeneration. The final site will have no treatments, and it will act as a control. And just as an aside, yes, I'm fully aware how monumentally logistically difficult that would be to set up. However, such difficulties could be ameliorated by working with private landowners to locate the harvest sites close to the disturbances, which could cut down on litigation and permitting. So then the 2 treatment sites can then be compared to the non-treatment site, as well as the 2 natural disturbances, to track their seral progression over time in a chronosequence study. The sites will be visited at regular intervals, and a vegetative species inventory will be done at each interval. In a perfect world with unlimited funding, there would also be a soil survey to track the nutritional content, structural changes, and the mycorrhizal and microbial communities over time, as well as a wildlife survey to see how these treatments affect the composition of the animal communities at each site. Will the treatments provide benefits over the control that wasn't treated? Will they resemble the recovery of their naturally disturbed counterparts? Only time will tell. Again, in a perfect world with unlimited funding, the sites would be surveyed every year for at least 100 years. But even a study where the sites are visited every 2 years for a span of only 20 years would result in preliminary data that could focus another research project and or provide land managers with enough data to confirm if the treatments are effective enough to justify their use. My name is Joshua Ling, and this has been a presentation on the management considerations of the Pacific Northwest for Colorado State University's F311 Forest Ecology course. Thank you very much for your time.